So I'll just go into really introducing our first speaker for today, which is Hailey Austin, who is a researcher from the University of Dundee. She did her research exchange at the Stockholm University, where she continued her research in comics, and where she was the lead ethnographic researcher at Star Stables, the leading girls browser video game, as well as she took part in kind of researching amongst a larger comics community at Stockholm. And Hailey's title for today's session is Star Stable and Stockholm's Female-Forward Creative Industries. So yeah, Hailey, over to you.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. So yes, thank you, Martina, for that introduction. Yes, I'm Dr. Hailey Austin. I'm an early career researcher, and today my presentation is called Star Stable and Stockholm's Female-Forward Creative Industries. So a bit about me, I did my PhD at the University of Dundee, and I just graduated last week, a year late. So I've had my PhD for a bit now, but it's officially over, thank goodness. So I have been working for the last year and a bit at Abertay University, also in Dundee, on the in-game international project, which is a creative industries project between the UK and China. So that has kind of informed kind of my method for this research in Stockholm. So my research questions for this project: what makes Stockholm's creative industries unique and successful? And mostly, why are there so many women in Sweden's creative industries as compared to the UK? So to boil it down, my question was, why ladies? And I found out why. The way I went about this research was doing qualitative interviews with people in Stockholm mostly, but also kind of around Sweden, about their experience in the creative industries. And for me, the creative industries here meant not only video games, which I'm working at Abertay, but comics, because I love them, but also board games. And what they believe makes these unique to Stockholm or Sweden. And I also did some desk research on Stockholm's creative industries, but that was mostly only video games that they have stuff on. So my outputs are going to be a dual language report on Stockholm's creative industries with my advisor, Dr. Miriam Palusari Eladari. So she's going to write the Swedish version for the Swedish government. And then I am creating and almost finished with a travelogue comic or fanzine. It's kind of both as a creative output, detailing my experience in Sweden and kind of behind the scenes of the research. So there's the report that's quite formal, but then there's actually what happened. It's more of the story behind the research. So yeah, so those are my outputs. I'm almost done with the zine. It's just taken me longer than I thought. Art is hard. So the research so far, I've done 22 interviews. I might be at 23 now, mostly with people involved in the video game industry, creative industries as a whole, board games, and comics. So some of the games companies I talked to, number one, Star Stable, which has been the leading girls browser game for the last 10 years. It's amazing. It's a huge company based in Stockholm, and the whole reason that I went, because it's one of the only companies that big that has such a small, relatively small market of young girls, and is doing really well. So I went from these huge companies, people who had worked at Paradox, another huge company, to smaller companies, a startup company that is trying to teach girls how to use Python and coding, which is Imagilabs, which is a startup. There's only 5 people, to a small one-woman studio, which was Valiant Game Studio. So it was a plethora of different sizes of studios. I also visited a board game studio, Ion Game Design, which was amazing. They're really doing lots of female-forward games. They have a female CEO. And then other kind of creative industries people. So Typey Type is a woman who does copy for all over Stockholm. So she has worked for Star Stable and other places like that. And another part of what I did was take in the local culture. So I went to several museums, including the Abergs Museum, which is one of Sweden's largest comics and kind of comics collections, which was amazing. I went to the Technical Museum, which had a huge video game, Swedish video game thing on. And then the best part was the photo in the center there, which was the Culture House. So they had a huge, not only library, but they had a huge comics library that took up almost the whole floor. And then they had a fanzine library within that, which was amazing. I spent 6 hours in there and checked out about 50 books, I think, while I was there. I also did playtesting at Ion Games. I playtested their new game, Samu Ramat, which is about a female ruler who did exist back in the day and had a bit of the Persian Empire. So that was really fun. And then kind of the biggest thing for me was, even when I wasn't working, when I just went to tour on the weekend, I went to the Vasa Museum, which is about this sunken ship that was dredged up like 600 years after it sunk. But everywhere there were games and comics that showed how much games and comics are part of Swedish society. So not only were there interactive games about what it was like to live on board a ship, which is the photo on the left, there was also an exhibit about what games they had on board the ship. And there was a famous Swedish children's comics character called Bamsa. And there was a comic in the gift shop about his adventure on this ship. So I learned they're everywhere. They're part of the culture. They were even walking around museums. There would be the comics showing the history of women's suffrage in Sweden, and it would be told all in comics. So it was eye-opening, definitely. So my initial findings, not only did I find horses, but I also found a few answers to my research questions. So comics and fanzines are a huge part of the culture. When I asked people if they read comics as a kid, they would say not really, only 10 different titles, which blew my mind because that's way more than a lot of people in the UK would say they've read. Comics and fanzines were also largely part of the feminist movement in Sweden. So like I said about the women's suffrage, but also fanzines are associated with the punk and feminist movements. And most of the comics creators in Sweden are women. And the studios are spread out over Sweden. They're not necessarily collective anywhere. Video games are a thriving export. Last I checked, they're Sweden's #1 export right now, which is amazing. There are lots of women in leadership roles, a lot more than in the UK. They have a good work-life balance, and they hire diverse talent from all over the world. But something I did learn was that Sweden does not have an attraction problem getting foreign workers to come work in video games. What they have instead is a retention problem. Most foreign employees only stay in Sweden for 21 months. And that is because of a lot of different factors, some cultural, some to do with visa. And it's a big problem that they're trying to solve. And my report is going to put forward some possible reasons for this when I go through all my data. So to answer my big question, why so many ladies? Well, it helps that they have paid maternity and paternity leave, 18 months of it, to be exact. Almost everyone I talked to cited that as a big reason that women are in the industry. There's a conscious effort to employ and promote women to leadership positions. This is not something that has happened by accident. This is something that they are doing on purpose. Many of the women that I talk to are more likely to join an industry or a studio if women are there already. So the problem kind of persists. If there's not women there, women aren't necessarily going to go there. The work-life balance is good in Sweden, and the culture allows for this work-life balance, and it's normal for people to take time off for caring duties, not only of children, but of the elderly. So these are my initial findings that will go in my report. So thank you very much for listening. This is my email address at Abertay, as well as you can find me on Twitter or ask me any questions here. Thank you very much.